Author Bonnie Morris, in your book, Revenge of the Women's Studies Professor. Revenge for what?
Well, you know, the title is not meant to be provocative or rude. It's about having the opportunity to talk back to many people who've stereotyped my field or asked really unfair questions. I have a lot of terrific students who are intimidated by the idea of taking a basic class in women's history. They come to me and express doubt or concern. They're afraid what people will say, what it'll look like on their transcript. So those experiences led me to a really keen awareness of how many people feel there's something wrong with looking at half the world's history. And I've negotiated many of these rude conversations throughout my teaching career. So the idea of revenge was I wanted to talk back, but in a cheerful way, a cheerful, playful way. I wanted to be the smiling face of women's studies and women's history, show that as a diplomat from academic feminism, I'm not scary, I'm approachable, I love my students, but enough with being rude to the professor. People who come by and say, I love your class, you're not at all a feminazi. Thank you, Rush Limbaugh, for putting that out there. So revenge is about, this is my say, you're not rude to the professor on the first day, the class will not hurt you, looking at women's history will only improve your life. And what's it like for those of us on the other side of the desk who have to deal with the whole range of our work being impugned by people who are fearful?
Where do you teach?
I teach at George Washington University, and I also teach part-time at Georgetown. And hello to my terrific students. I teach pretty much everything required for the minor and the major: introductory women's history, a specialized class on women's sports. It's called Athletics and Gender. Over-enrolled since 1996. And then I teach a big survey course in women's history, which has about 120 first-year students. Right now I have athletes from every sport. I have a lot of people who were in their first year, and then I have graduating seniors who have waited all these years with a different major just to take a women's studies class before they graduate.
What is women's studies?
Well, women's studies has been a department or a program at American colleges since 1969, and the first women's studies program was at San Diego State in 1969. It's an opportunity to look at pretty much all of the humanities from the perspective of how women's lives have been shaped, because that's material that's often neglected. Many people can go from kindergarten right through law school and never learn about women's contributions and still be considered an educated person. So if you want to put women at the center, women at the focus, and look at the very different experiences women have in every society because of law, work conditions, religion, or warfare, and education opportunities as well, this is a chance to make that the center of your research. And we cover just about everything. And it's just like any other class where you take exams and write papers.
What do you do with a women's studies major?
Well, the short answer to that is law school. Many of my best students have gone on to become lawyers, Title IX lawyers. A lot of people now work with women in development. Many students go abroad. They work with women, birth control, the issue of violence against women in regions ranging from Northern Africa to Bosnia. Many students do development in terms of nonprofits. They do programming for everything from Planned Parenthood to organizations that work with women and girls. I have a couple of students who've gone on to med school and do specialties in women's health, quite a few in nursing, and then I have a lot of students who are also, as athletes, involved in furthering women's sports. Some are athletic trainers. I have one at the Olympics right now, Alana Myers, who's in bobsled, already a medalist from the last Winter Games. And I have another student who's interning at the Winter Games, who's hoping to do some reporting on the situation of homophobia in Russia.
Do men take your classes?
You bet. I've got 50% guys in my sports class at Georgetown. I've got guys in all my classes. football, basketball, but also guys who were majoring in women's studies. And at George Washington, the chair is a guy, Dan Moshenberg. The men who take women's studies are very interesting. My brother took a class when he was an undergrad at Maryland. I would say the average guy who takes a women's studies class is often already focused on the experiences of women because maybe he's the son of a single mom. And then I have a huge percentage of international students who are really, perhaps this is the only chance they have to take a class like that before they return to Korea or Kuwait. I have guys from Iranian, Saudi Arabian backgrounds, many from Qatar, and I recently went there and gave a guest lecture. And I have a lot of students who are just curious, or they've heard someone else say that I'm nice, you know. And then once they take one of my classes, they take more, so they repeat. Once I got them, and they know I love them.
What was that experience like in Qatar?
It was distressing in a lot of ways because I felt very much like a third sex. I was not obligated to dress in a full head cover, body cover gown. I was not expected to veil, although I was willing to cover my hair. I was startled to find the large percentage of women in the country who cover their faces, and many are not Qatari citizens. A lot of the residents are in fact Saudi Arabian or international, but many women were not visible, and I'm used to making eye contact. You didn't see women's faces, so you didn't see their mouths moving, and the sense of their being silenced was magnified. Much of this is tribal. It's certainly not mandated in, you know, the Quran, but the experience I had was I was surrounded by Western men in suits, Arab men in beautiful, crisp white gowns, and women all in black who were very much covered. And then there was me in a Western suit. So it was an eye-opening experience, but I also found the opportunity to interact with women from all over the Arab world was what I wanted to do. That's why I was there. And I moderated a panel on discrimination in sport, which ended up being very much about racial and ethnic discrimination and not furthering opportunities for women and girls. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, but that's what I do.
In your most recent book, Women's History for Beginners, you open it by saying, read through a basic history book, say a state-approved U.S. history textbook intended for middle school classrooms, and you're left with the impression that all of human history was achieved by one sex, male.
Yeah. Well, and unfortunately, that continues. The biggest challenge for me, let's say, as an American educator, is that women's history and women's studies frighten people because the assumption is all women's issues are about the body. Therefore, all women's history will be somehow about sex and birth control. Therefore, it's not appropriate for a kindergartner or a middle school class. And education boards, PTAs, or the people who approve textbooks for Texas, that's controversial. My argument is there's plenty of women's history that is age appropriate, that encourages girls to consider the possibility they can run for office, or they look at where women have come from in terms of being closed out of political life and schools and juries. It's very easy to look at female achievers in history and have it be not controversial or not sexual. But we just don't do that. We don't do the research on Maria Mitchell, the astronomer, or have lessons that encourage girls to think beyond the imagery of the woman in the private sphere. And I think as a person who also reads AP US history exams, and I'm an exam leader for the College Board, putting women's history into something that an honor student should know is gradually becoming a successful mainstreaming of women's history. Now you have to know some women's history for the AP exam. Woohoo! So it's a process, but it's also still possible to have textbooks that don't reflect the range of what women have done, or the focus will be women and minorities, and you have white women and black men, and guess who gets left out there? And that would be African American women.